The Tarsian Dominion was the terror of the galaxy, an empire that had crushed civilizations beneath its technological might. From the frozen worlds of the Zvan to the volcanic planets of the Drenex, no species had ever withstood their onslaught. Their war machine was built on discipline, superior weaponry, and sheer ruthlessness. When their fleets arrived in Earth's orbit, there was no grand speech, no negotiation, no offer of surrender. The Dominion did not negotiate with lesser beings. Their conquests followed a simple pattern. Land, exterminate resistance, strip resources, and move on. And so, the massive warships of the Dominion descended upon Earth. General Kael'Roth, a hardened warrior with centuries of experience, stood aboard the command deck of the Void Harbinger. His 4 yellow eyes scanned the holographic map of the planet below, unimpressed by what he saw. A primitive world covered in green filth. Disgusting, he muttered. His armored mandibles clicked in distaste. How have these humans not advanced beyond their primitive existence? Colonel Zilvek, his second-in-command, nodded in agreement. Scans indicate most of their military infrastructure is concentrated in cities. However, their largest landmasses are covered in dense forests and jungles. A sign of their inefficiency, wasted space. Kael'Roth let out a cold chuckle. A backward species clinging to their organic refuse. It won't matter. Their cities will fall in hours. Deploy the ground forces. Our soldiers could use the exercise. Orders were given. The war machine of the Dominion awakened. Drop pods, each carrying a dozen heavily armed Tarsian soldiers, shot through the atmosphere like a meteor shower. The first wave landed in South America, a region where dense rainforests stretched for miles. The jungle meant nothing to the Dominion. Their armor was impervious to primitive weapons. Their scanners could track heat signatures through foliage. They would cleanse the terrain with fire, then advance on major population centers. They expected no resistance. They were wrong. The invasion begins. The Tarsian soldiers marched through the jungle, their weapons raised, their helmets scanning the unfamiliar terrain. They were disciplined, trained to expect the unexpected. But even among the Dominion, there was an arrogance toward lesser species. They mocked the wilderness around them. This terrain is inefficient, a soldier muttered, kicking aside thick vines with armored boots. These humans still rely on organic shelters? No proper fortifications? Another scoffed. This war will be over before it begins. Their commanders had assured them the humans would not be a challenge. Their armies lacked the advanced energy-based weapons the Dominion wielded. Their vehicles were loud, their communication methods outdated. We should burn it all down, a squad leader said, raising his flamethrower. Kael'Roth watched from orbit through a live feed. He had seen this play out on countless worlds, primitive natives attempting to fight back before being wiped out in a storm of plasma fire. He was already thinking ahead, planning the logistics of stripping Earth for resources. Proceed with cleansing operations, he ordered. Burn the jungles. Erase their hiding places. Let them see that their forests will not save them. The order was carried out instantly. Streams of liquid fire spewed forth from Tarsian weapons, igniting the dense foliage. Ancient trees crackled and split as they were consumed. The flames roared, climbing higher and higher, turning the once thriving jungle into a blazing inferno. The Tarsians advanced through the smoke, triumphant. This world falls today, one of them boasted. The Dominion will. A single gunshot cut him off. The soldier dropped, a hole clean through his helmet. His body slumped forward before the squad could react. Silence. Then another shot. Another soldier fell, blood pooling beneath him. Panic spread like wildfire. Contact. Enemy fire. The soldiers scrambled for cover, their exo-armor whirring as they activated defensive shields. But there was nothing to shoot at. There were no enemy positions, no trenches, no bases. Only the jungle. Kael'Roth narrowed his eyes. Where is the enemy? He demanded. Unknown, General. Zilvek barked back. Scanners are picking up. Nothing. It made no sense. The humans had to be there, someone had just shot 2 of his soldiers. But their scanners detected no movement, no heat signatures, no signs of life. It was as if the jungle itself had taken up arms against them. Kael'Roth's fingers curled into a fist. Find them. Crush them. The jungle's revenge. The Dominion spread out, scanning the area with drones. Yet, every attempt to locate the enemy ended in confusion. Soldiers walked in circles, growing more anxious with every step. The jungle seemed alive, shifting, watching them. Then the traps began. A squad moving along a narrow path suddenly vanished. A hidden pit, lined with sharpened wooden spikes, had swallowed them whole. Their armor was strong but gravity was stronger. Elsewhere, a patrol stumbled into a tripwire. Explosives, crafted from salvaged munitions, detonated in a vicious fireball, reducing the aliens to nothing but charred limbs. Panic spread like disease. Soldiers fired into the trees at shadows that weren't there. Their squad leaders barked orders trying to regain control, but the fear had already sunk in. Kael'roth could hardly believe what he was seeing. The Tarsians had fought advanced militaries before. They had faced bioengineered war beasts, plasma artillery, mechanized death squads. But they had never fought like this, against an enemy that struck from nothingness, that vanished before they could retaliate. "General," a field commander's voice came through, frantic. "They're hunting us." Hunting. The realization was unsettling. Kael'roth had thought of these humans as prey. Weak, primitive, insignificant. But now it was his soldiers who were being stalked. The jungle, which had seemed so unremarkable before, was now their enemy. And within it lurked something the Dominion could not understand, a force that knew every inch of the terrain, that knew how to kill silently and vanish into the mist. The Tarsians had come expecting a simple extermination. Instead they had walked into a nightmare. The first defeat. As the night fell, the terror of the Tarsian forces deepened. Whispers echoed through the trees, voices in an unknown language barely audible, yet impossible to ignore. Their drones picked up only static. Their heat sensors were useless. The enemy had disguised themselves with mud and plant matter, making them indistinguishable from the environment. The jungle swallowed their screams. The next morning, Kael'roth awoke to a horrifying sight. His troops, hundreds of them, were dead. Bodies were strung up from trees, stripped of their armor. Their weapons were missing. Their corpses were marked, symbols cut into their skin, written in human script. Kael'roth's blood ran cold as his drones translated the message carved into the bodies. "Welcome to the jungle." Kael'roth gritted his teeth. "This is impossible," he muttered. But deep down he knew the truth. They had underestimated this world. And now the jungle was teaching them a lesson. General Kael'roth stood motionless on the bridge of the Void Harbinger, his 4 eyes locked onto the holographic display in front of him. The battlefield feed showed only chaos, burning trees, alien corpses, and the twisted remains of their once mighty war machines. The Tarsian Dominion had expected a swift conquest. Instead they were being slaughtered. Across the war map, red indicators flashed, signals of lost squads, downed patrols, and entire units disappearing into the dense, impenetrable jungle. A cold unease crept through Kael'roth's body. His forces were not losing a war. They were being hunted. Terror in the trees. On the ground, Major Korik, a veteran Tarsian commander, crouched behind a fallen tree, his pulse rifle trembling in his hands. His once pristine armor was caked in mud and blood, and his breathing was ragged. It had been 3 hours since his unit had made contact with the enemy. Now he was the only one left. The others had been taken. It had started when the jungle turned against them. The trees provided no clear lines of sight. The thick humidity made their scanners malfunction. Their exosuits, designed for open battlefield engagements, became heavy prisons, trapping them in terrain they couldn't navigate. Then came the attacks. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. One by one, his soldiers had vanished into the mist. Some had fallen into deadly spike pits, their bodies impaled before they could scream. Others had been dragged into the foliage, their gurgled cries cutting off as unseen hands silenced them. And the worst part? They had never even seen the enemy. Korik gritted his mandibles and gripped his rifle tighter. He had been a soldier for 30 years, fighting on over 100 worlds. He had crushed insectoid hordes, exterminated entire species, and marched over the bones of civilizations. Yet he had never felt fear like this. A soft rustling came from his left. He spun around, finger on the trigger. Nothing. His helmet scanner detected 0 life forms. A trick. A lie. Another whisper, this time from behind him. His pulse spiked. Were they speaking to him? The voices were low, guttural, words he did not understand, but their meaning was clear. They were mocking him. Korik activated his comms, whispering frantically. "Command. Do you read? I'm the last survivor of my unit, requesting immediate extraction." Static. "Command, do you?" A hand shot out of the undergrowth, wrapping around his throat. Korik barely had time to struggle before the blade pierced through the gap in his armor, sliding smoothly between his ribs. His body convulsed as he was pulled into the darkness, his final breath a silent gurgle. The jungle claimed another. The Phantom Brigade. Miles away, hidden beneath layers of mud, leaves, and dense vegetation, Captain Logan Ghost Mercer watched through binoculars as the latest patrol vanished into the night. His team had been waiting for days, watching the alien invaders burn, march, and die. "That's the last of 'em," whispered Corporal Vasquez, wiping sweat from his brow. "Whole damn squad gone. Didn't even fire a shot." Logan lowered the binoculars. His eyes were cold, calculating. "They thought they'd walk in here and own the place," he murmured. "Now they're realizing this isn't just a jungle." Vasquez smirked. "Yeah. Then what is it?" Logan exhaled slowly. "A graveyard." The Phantom Brigade wasn't just any unit. They were Earth's most elite jungle warfare specialists. Trained to operate under complete secrecy, they were ghosts in human skin, masters of ambush tactics, guerrilla warfare, and psychological destruction. Every war game, every mission had led to this moment. They knew that if aliens ever came, Earth wouldn't win through firepower. They would win through fear. Logan tapped his radio, transmitting to the rest of his unit. "All teams report." A series of hushed voices confirmed the kills. "Team Alpha, 4 targets down. No alarms triggered." "Bravo team, we just took out their field commander. They're leaderless now." "Charlie team, 2 more units down. They're running scared." Logan nodded, satisfied. The Tarsians had no clue what they were fighting. Their scanners were useless, their heavy armor a liability, their training insufficient for a war waged in shadows. But Logan wasn't done yet. "Time to step it up," he said. "We hit 'em harder. Make them afraid to even breathe." Vasquez grinned. "More traps." Logan's eyes gleamed. "No. Now we take them apart. One by one." The jungle's fury. The Tarsian High Command was in full crisis mode. Kael'Roth stood rigid, listening to the frantic distress calls coming from his ground forces. The situation was worse than he imagined. Entire battalions had disappeared. Platoons were turning on each other, firing wildly at shadows, at whispers in the dark. Some had abandoned their posts, running blindly into the jungle, only to never be seen again. The mighty Dominion army had been reduced to scared animals. Kael'Roth slammed his fist onto the console. "Where are these humans? Why can't we find them?" A technician hesitated before speaking. "General, our scanners don't work in the jungle. The humidity scrambles the signals, and the enemy is masking their presence with organic matter. Our drones are blind." Kael'Roth's mandibles clicked angrily. "Then we deploy war mechs. Tanks. Bombers. I don't care if we have to burn this entire planet, find them." But deep down he knew it wouldn't work. This wasn't like the battles he had fought before. This wasn't war. This was something else. Something older. Something primal. The Tarsians had always believed in strength through technology. They thought plasma rifles and steel armor would win any war. But here, in this cursed jungle, they had met a force far deadlier than any weapon. They had met hunters. And they had just become the prey. The final transmission. As the night stretched on, the Void Harbinger received one final message from the battlefield. It was a video feed broadcasting from a fallen Dominion helmet. Kael'Roth's eyes widened as the footage played. A human stood in the center of a clearing, surrounded by burning Tarsian bodies. His face was caked in mud, war paint, and blood. His eyes were cold, merciless. Behind him, more humans emerged from the jungle, warriors, hunters, killers. Their weapons were primitive, their numbers small. Yet they had won. The human in the video raised a Tarsian insignia, torn from a fallen officer. He held it up to the camera. Then he spoke. "This is Earth. You don't belong here." The transmission cut to black. Kael'Roth's blood ran cold. For the first time in his life he understood true fear. He had led countless campaigns across the galaxy, erasing entire civilizations. He had conquered fortress worlds, slaughtered billions, and broken the will of mighty warriors. Yet now, standing aboard the command deck of the Void Harbinger, staring at the last transmission from his soldiers on Earth, Kael'Roth felt something new. A sickness in his gut. A cold dread in his bones. Because the mighty Tarsian war machine, the same machine that had burned planets to ash, was falling apart. And their enemies? They were humans. Primitive. Unevolved. Inferior. Yet they had turned the Dominion's greatest warriors into panicked, helpless prey. The Phantom Brigade had made them bleed. Now they would make them beg. Tactical retreat or massacre. The Dominion never retreated. It was a core principle of their empire. To retreat was to admit weakness. To abandon a battlefield was to insult their ancestors. But Kael'Roth had no choice. The entire jungle campaign was collapsing. Squads were disappearing, entire battalions were reduced to strung-up corpses, and the survivors were turning on each other, driven to madness by fear. The reports were nightmarish. They're everywhere. I don't see them, but I can hear them. They're in the trees, they're in the shadows, the jungle itself is alive. Weapons malfunctioning, something's jamming our systems. We can't, arch. Transmission ends. Please command. Evac us. I don't want to die here. I don't want to. Transmission ends. Kael'roth clenched his fists, staring at the battlefield reports in disbelief. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were humiliating the Dominion. And that was unacceptable. Commander Zilvek, he growled. The officer stood stiffly, his mandibles twitching. Yes, General? Kael'roth's voice was razor-sharp. Deploy the obliterator mechs. If these humans think they can fight like savages, we will show them the power of gods. The machines of war. The ground trembled as 6 obliterator-class war mechs dropped from orbit, slamming into the burning jungle like fallen meteors. Each fortress-sized mech stood over 40 feet tall, armed with plasma cannons, missile pods, and flame projectors capable of turning miles of forest into ash. Their armor was thick enough to withstand direct orbital strikes. They were the Dominion's ultimate war machines, unstoppable, indestructible, merciless. As the mechs activated, their massive floodlights cut through the jungle darkness. Burn them all, Kael'roth ordered coldly. The lead mech, Titanus 01, powered up its Omega-class flamethrowers and unleashed a storm of fire. Ancient trees exploded into flames. The jungle floor became an ocean of fire. Inside the cockpit, Mech Commander Sarthok sneered. Let's see your ghosts fight us now, primitives. The jungle screamed as it burned. The Tarsians thought they had won. They thought they had turned the tide. They were wrong. The trap closes. In the depths of the jungle, hidden beneath layers of mud and camouflage, Captain Logan Mercer watched the mechs through thermal binoculars. He didn't flinch as the jungle burned around him. He had expected this. The aliens had just made a fatal mistake. You see that? He whispered into his radio. Yeah, Vasquez's voice crackled back. They brought in the big boys. Logan's lips curled into a wolfish grin. Good. We've been waiting for this. He switched to the team-wide comms channel. All teams execute the plan. There was no hesitation. No fear. The Phantom Brigade moved as one. And the Tarsians never saw it coming. The jungle bites back. The first mech, Titanus 01, marched through the trees, incinerating everything in its path. Its sensors detected nothing. No humans. No movement. Nothing. Then the ground beneath it exploded. 100 pounds of C4, buried deep beneath the jungle floor, detonated with the force of a battlefield nuke. The explosion ripped through the mech's legs, sending the 40-foot war machine crashing to the ground. The jungle itself had swallowed it whole. Inside the cockpit, Commander Sarthok barely had time to scream before a spear of sharpened rebar, part of a pre-placed trap, impaled him through the chest. 1 mech down. 5 to go. The jungle erupted with gunfire. From the trees, from the mud, from underground tunnels, the Phantom Brigade struck. Snipers put armor-piercing rounds straight through mech visor slits, killing pilots in their cockpits. Explosive-tipped arrows struck weak points in the joint plating, blowing off limbs. Molotov cocktails filled with napalm turned the mech's own ventilation systems into death traps, roasting their pilots alive. The Tarsians screamed in rage and terror. This wasn't a battle. This was an execution. The end of the invasion. On the Void Harbinger, Kael'roth watched in horror as one by one, his invincible war machines fell. This wasn't possible. This wasn't happening. General? Zilvek cried out. We've lost over 90% of our ground forces. Our mechs are gone. The humans have destroyed our invasion army. Kael'roth staggered back, his entire world crumbling. How? How had a primitive species, one without energy weapons, without starships, without armor, defeated the Dominion? Then a final transmission came through. It was Logan Mercer. The human captain stood in the smoking ruins of a fallen Tarsian war mech. His face was painted with mud and blood. His eyes burned with cold fury. He spoke in perfect Tarsian. Your army is gone. Your weapons are worthless. This jungle belongs to us. Logan raised a Tarsian officer's severed head to the camera. Get off our planet. The transmission cut to black. Kael'roth's hands shook. For the first time in his life he felt true terror. Commander, he rasped. Order, the retreat. The Tarsian Dominion fled. And Earth stood victorious. Epilogue, Legends of the Jungle. The invasion of Earth became one of the greatest military humiliations in Tarsian history. The Phantom Brigade became legends. Among the stars, stories spread of the world where no invader could survive. A world where the jungle was alive. A world where the trees whispered death. A world where the Tarsians learned to fear the darkness. And that world had a name. In the days following their humiliating defeat, Tarsian warships limped away from Earth's orbit, their hulls scarred and their pride shattered. What had been planned as a swift conquest had turned into a nightmare written in blood and fear. The Phantom Brigade hadn't just won. They had made the Dominion afraid. For the first time in history, a mighty galactic empire had been repelled by a species with no spacefaring technology, no energy weapons, and no interstellar allies. It was unheard of, unacceptable. And across the Tarsian homeworlds, whispers of weakness began to spread. In the grand halls of the Dominion High Council, Kael'roth stood in disgrace before his fellow warlords. This failure has brought shame upon our empire, hissed Supreme Chancellor Vorkal, his 4 crimson eyes burning with fury. An entire invasion force lost to primitives. A world denied to us. Kael'roth lowered his head. The humans were not what we expected. You swore they were weak, another warlord spat. Yet they made us look like fools. Kael'roth clenched his mandibles. He had seen the humans in the jungle. He had heard their whispers, watched them turn his soldiers into terrified prey. They are not weak, he admitted. The room fell silent. They are hunters, Kael'roth continued, voice hollow. They fight with deception, shadows, and fear. They do not fight as other species do. They fight as monsters. The council erupted into shouted arguments. Then we must return. Burn their world. Exterminate them. No. We will not waste more resources. We must forget Earth. Kael'roth turned toward the Supreme Chancellor. What is your command, Chancellor? Vorkal's face darkened. He stared at the holographic image of Earth, then at the symbol of the Phantom Brigade, a human skull painted in jungle green. Erase all records of the invasion, Vorkal ordered. No one must know of this disaster. Kael'roth flinched. But the Dominion does not lose. The command was absolute. From that moment forward, Earth was a forbidden world. No Tarsian would ever set foot there again. Not out of mercy, but out of fear. Legends in the void. The galaxy had long believed humans were a primitive species, a world of animals destined for conquest. But after the invasion, something changed. Other alien empires noticed that the mighty Dominion had launched an attack on Earth, and never spoke of it again. Rumors spread. Some claimed the humans had been wiped out. Others whispered that the jungle itself had devoured the Tarsians. But among the warlords, bounty hunters, and smugglers of the galactic underworld, a different legend took root. They spoke of warriors cloaked in mud and shadow. Of soldiers who could vanish into the trees and strike with unseen hands. Of men who fought not with technology but with nightmares. To the rest of the galaxy, Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a cursed world. And its people? They were demons. The Phantom Brigade's final mission. Back on Earth, in the heart of the jungle, Captain Logan Mercer stood at the edge of a burning Tarsian war mech. The battle was over. But the war was just beginning. He turned to Vasquez, who sat cleaning his rifle. You think they'll be back? Vasquez asked. Logan exhaled. Not for a long time. Vasquez smirked. We scared him that bad, huh? Logan's face was unreadable. Scared him worse than bad. We made them forget us. Pause. Then what do we do now? Logan looked up at the stars, at the endless void beyond Earth's sky. They know about us now, he said quietly. But we also know about them. He turned to his men, battle-hardened, undefeated. The next time aliens show up on our planet, we won't be waiting. A slow, knowing grin spread across his face. We'll be hunting. Epilogue, Fear of the Unknown. In the deepest reaches of the galaxy, a Tarsian child asked his father about Earth. Father, the child whispered, is it true that we once tried to take the green world? The elder Tarsian hesitated, his mandibles clicking nervously. He had heard the stories. Of warriors who moved like shadows. Of soldiers who could kill without being seen. Of a jungle where even the Dominion's strongest had vanished. He placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. Never speak of Earth, he said. But why? The child asked. The elder shuddered. Because, he whispered, some places are not meant to be conquered.